We'll start today's video off with a question. What's the difference between endocrine and exocrine glands? Endo means in, like endocytosis, whereas exo means out. And so endocrine glands, they secrete into the body. And another way to remember this is into the blood. Always into the blood. And so endocrine glands always secrete their secretions into the blood. What is included in endocrine glands? Hormones. So all glands that make hormones are called endocrine glands. All endocrine glands secrete hormones. All hormones go into the blood. They might look something like this. Right, where they're made out of simple cuboidal epithelium. And they secrete what they make into a blood vessel, like that. Exocrine stands for out, and so they don't necessarily always go out of the body, but they go out of the epithelium. So glandular tissue is always epithelium. This is going to go out of the epithelium and into a duct. So an example of this would be your salivary glands, your pancreas. Well, your pancreas is actually an endocrine and an exocrine gland, but your pancreas, let's draw it like this, has a pancreatic duct in between. That is literally a tube, right, where all the secretions go into and then empty out into the duodenum. So exocrine is also often simple cuboidal epithelium, and it goes out into a duct. Which one of these would be further reaching effect? The answer would be endocrine, because it goes into the blood. Which one would be more of a local effect? The answer would be exocrine, because it just goes out a duct and onto the surface of the epithelium. So examples of this would be salivary, mammary, sebaceous. Notice these are all local, where they're just going to secrete and it just impacts where it secretes. It's not going to impact the entire body where, hormones can possibly impact the entire body. So I'm a little sick, as you may hear. Edit out most of my coughs. But I wanted to just discuss some interesting things or important things about connective tissue to add on to that introductory video that you watched. I always think it's interesting to think about disorders, and to have a disorder with connective tissue would be pretty significant, because connective tissue is the most abundant tissue in the body. So these are 4 celebrities, and they have something called Marfan syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder. We'll talk about what exactly they're missing. Isaiah Austin and Flo Hyman, they are 2 athletes. She was an Olympic athlete in the 80s. She was an Olympic volleyball player. Isaiah Austin, I think he's still on the U.S. World Basketball Team. Austin Carlisle and Bradford Cox, they are musicians. Bradford Cox, he's in a band called, I'm forgetting right now, Deer Hunter, and another band I can't remember. But this is his chest, this concave chest is very representative of individuals with Marfan syndrome. So I'm passing through these because that other video covered it. And we know that fibroblasts are the important cell in our connective tissue that secrete the matrix, and they're the most numerous. And then adipocytes are very common too. And then the other 4 here, macrophages, plasma cells, mast cells, leukocytes, these are all different types of blood cells. And we know that connective tissue is vascular, as you can see in this blood vessel here. And so we would expect it to have blood vessels. But what I find more interesting is the non-living stuff. And we know that collagen is the strongest fiber type, and the largest, and also the most abundant type. Elastic fibers, they are next in size and abundance, and they are important because not only can they stretch out, but like elastic band, they stretch back into place. They snap back into place, I should say. And then the last type here, reticular fibers, they are important for providing a supportive network. But not only is our connective tissue the most abundant, it's also the most diverse. And that's because of the ground substance. And so you can have a ground substance that is completely fluid, like plasma, to semi-fluid, like areolar tissue, to gelatinous, like cartilage, or adipose tissue, to completely hardened and calcified, like bone. So it's a very diverse tissue. And it's all because of the ground substance. And it contains water and other organic molecules. Maybe you've heard of hyaluronic acid, which if you're into skincare, that's a very common ingredient in moisturizers. That's because it's actually in our connective tissue. It holds on to water, so it helps retain moisture. Another one is glucosamine. Perhaps you have heard of that. You can take it as a supplement to strengthen your joints because it strengthens your connective tissue. So we're going to get into the different types. Dense connective tissue is densely packed with collagen fibers, as you can see here. And there are two types, which are not shown on this slide for some reason. Dense regular and dense irregular. And dense regular, as you can see in this picture, the fibers that look like pink highlighter are parallel to one another. And so what that really allows for is strength of force from two opposing sides, like a rope, think about tug of war. Whereas dense irregular, the collagen fibers actually look more like this. They're not regularly packed. They look very irregular. And so what that allows for is the capability of withstanding force from all sides like that. And so we find dense regular in areas where we would want a really strong rope. For example, like in our tendons and ligaments. Think about, I'm drawing your calf muscle here. This is the calcaneus, and this is the Achilles tendon. It has to withstand force from two opposite sides. Whereas the dense irregular, we tend to find that under skin, in the dermis, around deep organs, because our skin and our organs may require stretch from all sides. Loose connective tissue literally just means loosely packed with fibers. So as you can see in the picture, way less pink highlighter, way less collagen fibers here. You can see some elastic fibers. You might be able to see, no, those are elastic fibers. And what I like to say is like areolar tissue is like the universal packing peanuts of the body. It's the most common connective tissue type. If it has enough fat cells in it, where the fat cells dominate, it is now considered adipose tissue. So adipose tissue actually is areolar tissue, but it's just areolar tissue with a ton more fat cells. Next, we have cartilage. Cartilage to me is the prettiest of the histology that we see. And it is structural. It's almost as firm as our bone, but it's just a little more flexible. So it does provide support, but it's a little more flexible, so it acts more as a shock absorber than, say, bone would be. And not sure if you knew this, but our fetal skeleton actually begins as cartilage first, and then during development, fetal development, that is, it begins to ossify. The cartilage turns into bone before, delivery of the baby. And there's evidence of this in our long bones. We will see when we get to our next topic. There is cartilage on the ends of our bones that shows us that, our bones had cartilage to begin with. There's also, in growing bones, there's lines of cartilage right here called epiphyseal plates. So there is evidence of cartilage inside of our bones. So instead of these being called fibroblasts, these are called chondrocytes, and they reside in lacuna. Lacuna literally means little lake. It looks like a little lake. It looks like a little bubble. So that's what a lacuna is. And we have 3 types of cartilage: hyaline cartilage, fibrocartilage, and elastic cartilage. And cartilage is actually one big outlier of connective tissue in that it does not have blood vessels or nerves. And so perhaps you're a fan of fighting, like MMA fighting or UFC. My partner is. He's actually watching the game at a bar right now. And you may have noticed that some fighters have cauliflower ear, and that's because cartilage doesn't heal well because it doesn't have blood vessels or nerves. What you're going to learn in lab is that there is an area of connective tissue called perichondrium, which is closer to the edges of the cartilage. And this is where there is still vascularity, and so nutrients can kind of diffuse through the cartilage that way. Hyaline cartilage is the most common cartilage in the body. It's smooth, it's glassy. It was those previous purple pictures that you saw in the slides. And the collagen fibers here are thinner, they're stronger, they're not stronger, they're thinner, they're finer. They're actually pretty invisible in hyaline cartilage. And that's what makes hyaline cartilage really smooth and good for parts where they're going to connect. And so we find hyaline cartilage between our joints, as we will learn. We find them along our respiratory tract, fibrocartilage. And based off of its name, fibro means it has more fibers in them. And you can visibly see this beneath a microscope. It looks like grassier or hairier. They're really only found in 2 places: the intervertebral discs on the back and the pubic symphysis that joins the 2 pubis bones in the os coxa. And they're very strong. So if you've ever heard of a slipped disc before, what actually happens with that is there may be some movement here where a disc comes off of the body of the vertebra, and perhaps there's compression here, so you can get a bulge like that. It could actually go in on this way as well, and that can cause numbness. It can cause pain, shooting pain down the back or down the legs even. Elastic cartilage is called so because it has a lot of elastic fibers in them. And so if you look in here, the fibers look thinner like this, as you can see in this picture. And so we find this in areas that have a lot of flexibility and elasticity. So the epiglottis is one good example. The epiglottis, to me, it reminds me of those, like those door stops that puppies play with that are stuck on the wall that go boing, and they're very springy. That's basically what your epiglottis is like. It's like a tab of elastic cartilage. And there is no muscle associated with it. And when we eat food, food is going to just push down on it, so it goes like that, and then it prevents food from going into your trachea. We wouldn't want that. So it's very springy, very flexible. We're going to talk more about bone in another video, but bone has all the characteristics of connective tissue, except that the ground substance is now a calcified matrix. It definitely contains collagen fibers, and here the fibroblasts are not called that, and they're not called chondrocytes either, because chond has to do with cartilage. These are called osteocytes. Osteo, like osteoporosis, has to do with bone. And so we'll talk more about bone in another video.